Well, thank you very much indeed for that most generous introduction. I had no idea that you could make a sort of CV last that long, but anyway, thank you very much. And I'm going to say a few words about mainly commercial diplomacy, but I'm going to look at how the cultural links that Britain has and the organisations the UK uses help that particular agenda. And it's going to be maybe not quite what you were expecting, because you probably were expecting more on the sort of cultural side. But I'm going to say a few words about the problem that the UK faced and what we're doing to try and solve it. I mean, I'm very happy to take questions. And so when would you like me to finish the session? Yeah, OK, that's fine. Well, if I speak until maybe just after 22, and then we'll have questions. I think the dialogue could be interesting and worthwhile. Well, first of all, when the coalition government was formed, we faced what were really pretty catastrophic economic circumstances. We had a massive deficit, around about 160 billion. That's the annual deficit, with a debt that was rising very fast. We were in danger of losing our credit rating, and our national debt, which of course goes on going up until you get the deficit under control, was creeping up to the 1 trillion sterling mark. It was heading up to 100% of GDP. And certainly when debt to GDP ratios get to more than about 120%, you're moving into the point of no return territory, which is probably where Italy is now, if I can observe. So we were facing a really, really serious situation. And apart from the austerity measures that were needed immediately, and of course a drive to try and get growth back into the economy was vital, sorting out the problems of the banks, but also the role of trade in all of this was absolutely pivotal, because the last time the UK had a trade surplus was 1982. And we're a great trading nation. We're a nation of merchants, of entrepreneurs, of businessmen and women. And so what we decided to do was to look at how we could actually get trade moving into surplus again. And if I just give you one example of how serious things were, when we came into office, our total bilateral trade, that's two-way trade in goods and services, with the whole of the African continent, that includes North Africa, obviously the very successful economies of places like Morocco, Algeria. Our total trade with the whole of Africa, bilateral trade, was 32 billion in 2010. That's two-way trade, that's the sterling figure. Our total bilateral, this is a continent of now 54 countries, with some of the most rich resources and reserves anywhere in the world, with some of the most impressive entrepreneurs anywhere in the world. Our total trade with the Republic of Ireland, a small country in Europe with a population of 3 million, was 42 billion sterling. So the whole of Africa, 32, Ireland, 42. And what we decided to do was not turn away from Europe, but to look at these emerging markets in a completely new light and see all of them as an opportunity. And we decided to put in place an action plan to really concentrate on all of the emerging markets, not just the BRICS. I think if I have a criticism of the last government, it was they concentrated on the BRICS, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, now South Africa, and the sub-BRIC countries, countries like Mexico, Indonesia, Malaysia, very important economies. But we were ignoring some of the other opportunities around the world. And so we decided to completely reorientate the Foreign Office away from just power politics and diplomacy, but to look very, very acutely at commercial diplomacy. So we have around the world 235 missions around the world. Obviously, some of those will be consul generals, some will be political offices. We have been reopening or opening for the first time a number of new embassies. And for example, in the patch that I had responsibility for, we opened 5 new embassies in Africa in the last 2.5 years, some of them in key emerging markets. And we also, I'll just give you, I don't want to go too granular in this talk, but I'll give you one example of how seriously we decided to concentrate on the detail. And that was that in West Africa, we had a very small footprint in terms of the amount of people on the ground. and we were losing out to other countries in a big way. And what we decided to do was to totally reinvigorate UK trade and investment. That's the arm of the government that promotes inward investment into the UK, which has been very successful, we know that, and also promotes UK exports. And it was concentrating mainly on the bigger markets. But we decided to move it into some of the very small markets. And we did this by setting up local offices in a number of key countries. And if you take the West African example, we decided to set up commercial offices in the embassies in La Côte d'Ivoire, in Senegal, and also in Sierra Leone. And these were locally employed people reporting to the UK Trade and Investment Headquarters in Ghana. But these guys were all high caliber people whose sole aim was to help boost British exports. And since these guys have been in place, we've had in each of those countries literally dozens and dozens of trade delegations going out there, a huge amount of interest in those countries. And we've got ambassadors who are completely and totally focused on the job in hand, which is not just diplomacy and looking at what's happening in, for example, the Sahel, which is very worrying and very concerning, but looking at where Britain's interests lie. And that is really working very well. We are increasing our trade in all of those countries, and it is not nuclear physics this. We've got to get more UK companies exporting. In Germany, for example, 28% of all SMEs export. In Britain, the figure is 19%. If we can get that figure up to, say, 24%, we're going to have a trade surplus, and we're going to have probably another 800,000 jobs in the UK. Now, where does the cultural side of it help? And we'll explore this more in questions in a moment. But we do have a number of absolute key advantages over other countries. We have a British Council, which is absolutely world-renowned. And in most of these countries, we have a British Council office that is looking at all sorts of cultural links, looking at also, for example, teaching languages, looking at embedding top local government expertise in local authorities, all sorts of exchange programs, working with universities. But we're now getting the British Council to work more closely with the rest of the British family in these countries. And it always struck me, I would go to countries and I would go to the British Embassy, I'd go to the embassy, and I'd hear about the British Council, which was maybe down the road, in a totally separate silo, in a separate office, doing its own thing, and maybe doing a fantastic job. But, you know, for example, when we have a trade delegation going to Ghana, Nigeria, Trinidad and Tobago, why aren't the British Council also closely involved? Why aren't they, for example, even in the same building? And why aren't they playing a really close part in the trade agenda? Because actually, trade between two countries builds people-to-people links, and that reinforces culture. And we've actually got this organization here that is almost unique in the world, and to use it to complement Britain's trade diplomacy, to me, is incredibly important. And that is exactly what's happening. And in more and more countries, the British Council is coming into the same building as the British Embassy. And that's not always possible, because sometimes if you're in a difficult security environment, the British Council obviously has its own particular brand, and sometimes it does need to be separate. I entirely accept that. And in some countries, the British Council does have an iconic building. Anyone who's been to Accra will know that during the civil war in that country, in Ghana, the British Council was a beacon for British values, for rule of the law, and it was somewhere where a lot of people who were involved in political struggles would go. And it is an iconic building. We have similar iconic buildings in Sierra Leone, in Freetown, and there are other countries where the British Council has established itself in historic buildings, and we certainly wouldn't want to move them out of those buildings. But we want them working more closely with the rest of the British family. And I think the other, I was fortunate enough to be one of the FCA ministers during the Olympics last year. And on our travels as Foreign Office ministers around the world in the run-up to the Olympics, we saw the Olympics not just as a huge opportunity for showcasing the best of Britain in terms of the incredible show that we were going to put on, but also for actually explaining to people a bit more about British values. And so in every single mission, all of these 335 missions around the world, we had major events in the run-up to the Olympics, not just during the Olympics, but we had major events in the run-up to the Olympics to try and build up sporting links, cultural links. And to encourage youngsters as well, and to focus actually, one of the areas where we had most success actually was all of these emerging markets had Olympic teams coming to Britain, and some of them had the most amazing athletes. But in the past, the Paralympians have been completely ignored. And what we did, we laid on special events in different countries for the Paralympians, inviting them around to the British residence, for example, for social events, for the launch of their team. The British ambassador, or if ministers were in country, to actually go to the departure ceremony that these Paralympians had. And we found that was a way of actually celebrating not just Paralympics, the Paralympics movement, which is very important, but also concentrating on what in many of these countries was really not a key priority, which is looking after disabled people, empowering disabled people. And when you build that sort of trust, then from it will flow warmer and stronger bilateral relations. So you could call that cynical. I would call it actually making use of a big opportunity to build links around culture, around sport, around the disability agenda, which was really, really important, and it's worked incredibly well. I was going to mention two other points before concluding. First of all, the one thing that Britain has that China doesn't have, but America has to some extent, Brazil doesn't have it, India doesn't have it. We have a huge diaspora here in Britain. And one of the things that the government are trying very hard to do is to actually harness the diaspora around the commercial trade agenda. And one area is around remittances. And most of the diasporas from countries that have been conflict-torn or countries that are seriously challenged in terms of economies and everything else, they will remit large amounts of money back to those countries. But they're paying ridiculous transfer fees to banks. A lot of that money is simply going under the bed. It's not being properly invested. And if you take Somalia, for example, I think there are somewhere in the region of 300,000 Somalis in Britain. They're remitting in excess of $2 billion a year back to Somalia. It's an incredibly important part of the Somali economy. But there's no formal mechanism for that money being invested or opportunities given to the diaspora to find ways of paying this money into maybe small businesses, SMEs. It could be social action schemes on the ground. It could be mini development schemes. But there's no structure of that whatsoever. And so we're doing a lot of work around how to actually tap into that diaspora. And indeed, there are various companies that have been set up by the diaspora in the UK to invest in their countries. And they're doing, one or two of these countries are heading for the London Stock Exchange, but they're doing a public offering round with the diaspora in the UK. And that's proving incredibly successful because there's a huge appetite for the diaspora to invest in their mother countries. And we want, again, for this exchange of people to be one that is stronger than in any other country in the world. I think we have that advantage with such varied and large diasporas here. The other huge link we have, and it's an incredibly important cultural link, is the Commonwealth. It doesn't cover every country, of course not. There are 54 countries in the Commonwealth, but what it does cover, it covers 32% of the world population. It covers something like slightly less than that of the world GDP. But it covers the whole world, basically, and the links that can be built up from the Commonwealth. And I'm a great believer in trying to bring the Commonwealth family in London more closer together and to coordinate it better, because within the Commonwealth family, you have many organizations that are focusing primarily on people-to-people links and on cultural links, on the arts, on the creative industries, on sport. And I think that there's phenomenal potential in what is a global race for Commonwealth countries that share, after all, the English language. They share, in many ways, a shared history, the common law system. You have, obviously, the achieving scholarships. You have Commonwealth scholarships. You have the educational links between the countries. You've got many universities now opening campuses abroad. You've got schools doing the same. And so building those links around what is education and culture is incredibly important. And so my final remark really is this. We're in a very competitive, tough global race at the moment. And no country has a divine right to retain its position anywhere in any league. And Britain is fortunate. We are in the top 10 economies in the world in terms of GDP. But we have absolutely no right to stay there. And we won't stay there unless we're much more innovative, much more enterprising, much more imaginative in the bilateral links that we have with other countries. And we take the view that the country in question, however small, however insignificant it might be in terms of the UN or the World League, is nevertheless potentially an incredibly important ally and friend of Britain's. And building trade, building cultural links, and building better bilateral relations with every country is an absolute key priority. Thank you. I look forward to hearing what you've got to say and any observations or questions.